deep in the jungles of Lustria, there exists an ancient race who were once the sole custodians of the planet. They are the children of the Old Ones, created to perform the sacred task of guiding the world along the great plan, set forth by the enigmatic creators of the world. However, these cold-blooded guardians would never be able to complete their creator's design, as chaos came screaming into the world, throwing all into ruin. The Old Ones were lost when chaos came, but before their fall, they used their limitless powers of foresight and quickly dictated all of the great plan so their children might save this world. The first generation of the wise Slán wrote down the final commands of the Old Ones upon golden plaques and demanded a copy be made for each city. It was at this time, however, when the war against the demons of chaos began in earnest. By the time the war ended, many temple cities were lost, and with them nearly half of the great plan was now gone. The Slán did everything in their power to reclaim what was lost, realizing that each city had slight interpretations of the same plaques, requiring much deliberation and each piece to discover the true meaning. One plaque above all others, though, was unique. In the temple city of Chakwa, the Slán found a plaque no other city had. This prophecy told of the rise of a race of ratmen, and the fall of Chakwa itself. It also told of the rise of a mighty serpent god named Sotek, who would purge these ratmen and deliver the Lizardmen from destruction. Due to it being the only copy, the Slán of Chakwa feared that if their brethren sensed them contemplating this plaque, the other Slán would demand to scrutinize it and declare it as tainted prophecy, or even destroy it. Because of this, the Slán secreted it away and avoided the plaque, not realizing that by doing so, they doomed themselves and their entire city. Thousands of years later, the Skaven arrived in Lustria. Clan Pestilence rose and began to branch out from the ruined city of Quetzal. The closest city was Chakwa, and it was not long before the Lizardmen found themselves dealing with a terrible plague. The Skaven had been observing the Lizardmen for quite some time, designing pestilence to ruin the denizens of Lustria. The Slán brought forth the prophecy of Sotek and began carefully analyzing it, but in the meantime thousands of skinks perished. However, things reached a new level when some of the spawning pools were infected, so instead of fully formed skinks breaching the waters, only malformed creatures crawled out to die shortly thereafter. With all of the Slán of Chakwa now dead, the skink priests were left in charge. The greatest of their number was Tehenhauin, a powerful skink with a red crest, one of many that had been spawned in recent times. He retrieved the plaque of Chakwa and a sacrificial dagger from the now ruined city and led the survivors into the jungle. Tehenhauin understood the prophecy of Sotek and was filled with endless hatred for the Skaven who destroyed his beloved city. He forged the plaques into a totem and began marching to each temple city, gathering larger and larger hordes of Lizardmen with his fiery speeches. He spoke of the prophecy, telling all of the Lizardmen that Sotek was coming to end the age of the rat, but he would need millions of Skaven in sacrifice to be powerful enough. Skinks took to this cult with fervor even as the Slán held it in disdain, the ancient mage priest refusing to acknowledge Sotek as they could not find his name mentioned in any of the other sacred plaques. However, as the tides of Skaven poured across Lustria and the plague infiltrated each of the cities, this belief became hard to maintain. As the Slán spent time meditating inside their massive temples about how to handle the crisis of Skaven, Tehenhauin led a massive horde known as the Red Host across Lustria. Every time the Skaven laid siege to a temple city with their hordes and war machines, Tehenhauin would come crashing out of the jungle at the head of a large host to tear apart the enemy. After his first few victories, Tehenhauin claimed the title as the Prophet of Sotek, and became equal to the Slán in the eyes of the skinks. Even Saurus and Kroxigors began to rally to his banner as he crushed the Skaven, battle after battle. The Skaven and the Lizardmen showed no mercy during battles, but many Skaven began to be captured as the Prophet of Sotek demanded they be sacrificed upon the altars of the Old Ones. The Slann feared the plagues that followed the Ratmen, and banned sacrifices from the cities, resulting in Tehenhauin leading long lines of captives into the jungle to find long-forgotten altars. Here, he sacrificed the rats of Clan Pestilence in many different ways, hurling them into a pit of snakes to be devoured alive, ripping out their still-beating hearts, throwing them down stone steps, poisoning them with powerful snake venoms, and drugging them to be eaten by massive serpents whole. Skaven chieftains and warlords, however, were always beheaded by a prominent member of the Red Cult, ancient Scar leader Krokkar having the highest number at well over 1,000. With each victory, Tehenhauin gained more prestige, each sacrifice making the comet in the sky glow brighter, even as the Prophet himself increased in power. A carpet of serpents gathered under him, and even as he cut down his foes with his venomous dagger, the snakes swarmed over them, biting and choking them. The red-crested priest even was blessed with visions, finding and unleashing rare engines of the gods without the Slann's permission. He often even rode a stegodon carrying such a device, activating it to blast entire regiments of Skaven to ash. Tehenhauin wanted the assistance of the Slann, and forced them to contemplate his desires after he issued a crushing victory against the Ratmen at the Maliente swamps. Here, he captured a large horde of Skaven prisoners, and the Slann finally relented to his desire to sacrifice them within the temple cities. The entire population of such cities, besides the Slann themselves, would come out to observe as Tehenhauin gave his fiery oratories, and Skaven were ritually butchered behind him. Thus, did the Prophet gain unmatched power among the skinks, leading the Lizardmen in a united force. Red-crested skinks were spawning at all of the temple cities, and gathered to him even as Saurus, Kroxigor, and mighty beasts of the jungle rallied to his banner. His magic became unmatched by any of the Ratmen sorcerers, as he imbued the Lizardmen with terrifying strength, and made their scales impenetrable to attack. He hurled massive spears made of amber light to strike down abominations, and hurled thunderbolts to immolate units. The Skaven were beaten back time after time, until finally they had had enough, and gathered in force to face him. The largest battle of the war took place at the Guacmole crater. Here, Tehenhauin marched at the head of his host out upon the edge of the crater to see an endless tide of Skaven arrayed against him. Undeterred, he unleashed his hordes with the brilliant strategy that he's still famed for to the modern day. Very much like the forked tongue of his god, the Prophet's army struck lightning fast in forked assaults, slamming into the weak points of the enemy line before surrounding them and crushing them like a serpent's coils. He was a master tactician at jungle warfare, often surprising his enemies even as they faced him within the open crater. Tehenhauin was a ruthless general, deadly warrior, and potent wizard at the Guacmole crater, as he obliterated his way through the Skaven line and shattered their resolve, even as he summoned tides of serpents to cripple the movement of his foes. Saurus and enraged skinks cut down swaths of Skaven, salamanders immolated entire ranks, and stegodons smashed into their flanks with crushing force. Tehenhauin shattered the resolve of the cowardly Skaven, and the army routed, yet not a single one escaped. The Prophet captured such a massive amount of Skaven that the captive train took days to pass, as it was marched to a secluded altar in the deep jungle. Here, Tehenhauin enacted a great ritual, where he slaughtered so many of the Ratmen that the wide Amazon River ran red with tainted blood. After the ritual's climax, the twin-tailed comet filled the sky, and Tehenhauin was infused with immense power, even as tides of serpents slithered forth all throughout the jungles of Lustria. After this ceremony empowered him, the Red Host was nigh unstoppable, shattering army after army, and pushing towards the Clan Pestilence capital in Quetza. The Lizardmen cut their way towards the city, and laid siege to the Ratmen, seeking to wipe out the Skaven entirely. At the height of the siege of Quetza, Tehenhauin led his closest disciples into the jungle, and on the dawn of the third day, arrived riding a massive Arcanodon, leading a group of ancient Stegodons with each carrying a rare engine of the gods. 12 engines in total were brought forth, and obliterated thousands upon thousands of the vile Skaven. Thus was Archlord Nurglich and his Plague Lords forced to flee Lustria. They formed their army into a column and smashed through a small point of Tehenhauin's army, desperately fleeing to the eastern coast. Realizing their attempt to escape, Tehenhauin rallied the Lizardmen into a relentless force that harassed the Skaven all the way to the coast and beyond, the fuming Serpent Island. Here, the final battle of the war took place. Finally forced from his fortress, Arch-Plague Lord Nurglich met Tehenhauin in battle. Stegodons crashed into the rotted frames of plague furnaces. Kroxigors crushed pox rats beneath their huge weapons. Hordes of red-crested skinks slammed against ranks of plague monks. At the center of it all, Tehenhauin, the Prophet of Sotek himself, reaped a bloody tally. His blade of the serpent's tongue cut down champions and monsters with terrible ease, and he finally laid his hate-filled eyes on Nurglich. In that small meeting of gazes, Nurglich realized one ultimate truth. If he faced the Prophet of Sotek, he would die. Thus, Nurglich tricked an entire quarter of his army into trying to kill the Prophet, as he and the remainder of his army boarded their ramshackle fleet and tried to flee. But it was at the height of this battle, when fact becomes more of a myth. Here, many skinks claim that from the bubbling volcano on the island, a godlike serpent erupted from the lava and slammed into the Skaven horde, shattering them and claiming victory for the Lizardmen. Even then, this god plunged into the ocean, pursuing the Skaven fleet as they fled terrified into the east. And so did the war end, and Tehenhauin claimed victory. The Slán could not deny him at all any longer, and thus called a great conclave. For the first and last time in history, the Slán gathered in person at Itza for a meeting. Here they summoned Tehenhauin, who was to speak to them of Sotek. His words were not recorded on order of the Slán, and the mighty doors sealed. When they reopened, Tehenhauin marched out even as the Slán declared it right that Sotek be worshipped, for he was of the old ones, and temples must be built in his name. Thus did the Prophet usher in a prominent god of the Lizardmen. He returned to the jungle to continue his mission of hunting down the Ratman for many years, but would reappear when the Lizardmen needed him most. Tehenhauin's most famous reappearance was in 2502 of the Imperial calendar, when he showed up in Lustria to lead an army to the Skaven city of Slagmire. The Slán teleported him and an army of Lizardmen to the Old World, and a 3-year siege began. The Prophet led the Lizardmen to victory, and eventually destroyed the city, along with their new rocket invention that surely would have spelled doom for the forces of order. Tehenhauin's final appearance was in the End Times, which some people don't consider canon, but I'll go ahead and tell what happened here. Tehenhauin arrived to fight in Lustria when Clan Pestilence invaded. Here, he fought a number of skirmishes and running harassment battles with the Skaven, constantly keeping them on edge and demoralizing them. It was Tehenhauin and his army, the Red Host Reforged, that saved Itza, the first city, from the initial invasion. During the second and final invasion of Lustria by the Ratmen, he harassed the Skaven many times, but unfortunately, Clan Pestilence called their corruptors, the Vermin Lords, into battle, and these very same creatures were able to kill the very jungle itself. Without having the environment on his side, Tehenhauin was forced to draw a final battle, and chose to stage it in the fallen city of Pahaks. Here, Tehenhauin fought a mighty battle against the Skaven, but ultimately knew he could not prevail. He weakened them as best he could before withdrawing his forces and fleeing back towards Hexadol, where Lord Mazdamundi finally roused himself to do war with the Skaven. After that, no one really knows what happened to Tehenhauin. It's not recorded whether he died on Lustria or was sent with many of the Lizardmen up to the stars? Unfortunately, we will probably never know the answer to that question, but with Total War Warhammer coming and the Lizardmen hopefully making an appearance in the second or third expansion, maybe we'll get to see Tehenhauin and rewrite his story. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this rather long video over one of the special characters of the Warhammer world, especially since I hope he eventually shows up in a Total War game sometime. What character would you like to see examined in the next special character video? Let me know in the comments below. By the way, as far as longer videos go, keep an eye out for the upcoming race videos that I know are quite popular on most of the Warhammer Fantasy channels. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and let me know if there's anything else you'd like me to cover in future videos. Thanks, and take care.